Good morning, dear friends, and thank you for joining us once again here at the Blue Lotus Meditation and Mindfulness Center for our biweekly Dharma talk and reflection on life's events, how we can use the Buddha's teachings to ease our own suffering, how to navigate through the world with reduced dukkha or suffering. And so welcome again for joining us. Today is February 2nd, 2026. It is now 6:30 a.m. here in the Central Time Zone. So before we begin, I do want to thank our channel supporting members for helping to make all of our efforts possible and to help us go out and meet people throughout the world so that they too can learn the teachings of the Dharma for a more peaceful life, a more balanced life, and supporting their well-being. So I want to just bring an announcement for those of you who may be dealing with problems of addiction. We have our new Dharma recovery journal that just came out. And so it's a month-long journal, a gratitude journal, specifically for those who are, going through addiction and wanting to find meaning, right? So sometimes, and it's a very hard challenge for those. And so this gratitude journal hopefully can help someone along their way. But let's start with the three jewels before we continue. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Sathu, Sathu, Sathu. So today we're gathered for a teaching that feels, feels especially relevant in these times, and it's walking the middle path through hard times, right? Hard times are certainly nothing new for humanity and for yourself as well, whether it's illness, a loss of a loved one, uncertainty, conflict, disappointment. And these have always been a part of the human story, your story as well. What feels new is the intensity and the consistency with which many of us are experiencing these situations. News cycles move faster than our nervous system allows, than it can balance to. Expectations are high, stability feels fragile, and many people quietly wonder, how am I supposed to live wisely in the middle of this? And that's a good question, right? A lot of times with uncertainty, we're forced to make split decisions that are very, very quick. But the Buddha never promised a life free from difficulty, right? What he offered instead was something far more honest and far more liberating, a path that allows us to meet the difficulty without being destroyed by it. And this path is known as the middle way. So it's important for us to understand that the middle way is not going to be one of those extremes, extreme deprivation, right? Or extreme indulgence in whatever those emotions that surface. So today's reflection is not about bypassing pain or pretending that everything is fine, right? It's about learning how to walk through that hardship with balance, compassion, and clarity. Again, rather than being, pulled apart by those extreme situations, those extreme emotions that we get. So in the Buddha's first teaching, in the Four Noble Truths, he begins simply with the statement, but it's a very radical statement or acknowledgement, that there is dukkha, Dukkha is often related or translated to as suffering, but dukkha also means unsatisfactoriness, stress, or the sense that things are never quite settled, right? Sometimes we just kind of feel that something is quite missing out of that result. And hard times are an expression of dukkha, but so is resisting them, right? Much of our suffering does not come from the difficulty itself, but how we relate to it. And so when hardship arises, we often move towards those extremes. We may try to escape it through distractions, numbing, or denial, or we may collapse into it, right? Becoming overwhelmed, hopeless, or self-blaming. So think about that. Which ones do you tend to fall into when times get really tough? Both responses are understandable, though, right? But neither is liberating, right? Each one of those responses will lend us to falling into more suffering, right? So the middle path does not deny pain, right? It does not, drown ourselves in it, right? It invites us to stay present, to meet difficulty with awareness rather than reactivity, right? So it's how to navigate that particular moment of suffering. So this is not passive acceptance, which is important to understand. It is an active, courageous way of being with life as it is. And so the middle path is often misunderstood. It's not about compromise or mediocrity or even emotional neutrality. It's not about splitting the differences between joy and sorrow. Right? The middle path is wisdom in relationship. Right? So it's dealing with wisdom, nurturing wisdom in our decisions, in how we talk. So when the Buddha spoke of the middle way, right, he was responding to two extremes. He had lived himself. So think about that. Think about Buddha's history, right? Self-indulgence. Remember, he was a prince, so he had everything around him, right? So which, he was, certainly, he certainly witnessed every day, right? Self-indulgence, which seeks happiness by constantly chasing pleasures, right? Or even self-mortification, which is the opposite end of that spectrum, which seeks purity or worth through punishment and deprivation. So remember that before Buddha became enlightened, he spent about 5 years, right, just punishing himself through lack of food, lack of clothing, right, lack of existence. In that sense, just sequestering himself away from others. So in modern life, these extremes, right, they do show up in more subtler ways. Overworking versus giving up. Spiritual bypassing versus emotional overwhelm. Or rigid control versus total chaos. Right? We can see a lot of these examples in modern times, just daily. But walking the middle path means asking again and again, which of these responses reduces suffering rather than adds to it? Right? Sometimes the middle is strength. Sometimes the middle is rest. Sometimes it is speaking truth. And sometimes it's even remaining silent. So the middle path is alive and it requires mindfulness. So that's where the wisdom comes in, right? We have to mindfully reflect on what are our actions? What are our thoughts? Because our thoughts dictate our actions of how we think and how we feel. And when we are mindful of our thoughts and actions, we develop wisdom. And so one of the most liberating shifts in Buddhist practice is realizing that hard times are not interruptions to the path. They are the path. So we can practice mindfulness and meditation all day long, sitting quietly, right? Without a bother in the world. Turn off the TV, turn off, any radio distractions or whatnot. We can sit there all day long quietly. But what happens when something arises? Something that disturbs us. So that's when we refer to as those interruptions to our peace and calm, right? That is part of the path. And so if we wait for life to settle down before practicing patience and compassion or equanimity, we're going to end up waiting forever. And if you're a Prince fan, you would say forever is a mighty long time for our Prince fans in Minneapolis area. And so the Buddha compared practice to learning to play the lute, right? The lute, like a little tiny harp, right? If the strings are too tight, they break. And if they're too loose, right, they don't produce a sound. And only when they are tuned just right, does that music arise. And so hard times are how we learn to tune ourselves. When grief arises, we practice compassion. When fear arises, we practice steadiness. When anger arises, we practice restraint. Right? So this does not mean forcing ourselves to be calm. It means being honest and gentle and curious with what is present. Right? Remembering not to indulge in those extremes. Right? We want to find that middle path. Sometimes that middle path is simply the opposite too. So the middle path is the embodiment through that noble eightfold path, right? Which offers practical guidance for daily life, especially during those hard times, right? Those hardships that inevitably we all face, right? But let's briefly touch on a few elements that support us through those difficult times. And it's right view, right? Reminds us that pain is part of life. It's not a personal failure, right? Remember, life is suffering. Life is dukkha. Right intention, right? Invites us to respond with kindness rather than aggression or avoidance. And right speech asks us to speak truthfully and gently, even when emotions are strong. How many times have you said something that you wish you could walk back or take back because you were very emotional, right? Right effort teaches us to neither force nor abandon ourselves, but to apply energy wisely, right? Again, avoiding those extremes. And right mindfulness, allows us to, in the present moment where real life and real choices exist, right? Remember that moment. Moment is very fleeting, right? It can pass. It's already passed from the first sentence. That's how quickly moments in our lives just move forward. And so the Eightfold Path is not a checklist, right? So understand that you can't just go from right speech, all right, I've done that. Let me go to right effort, right, into right mindfulness. They all intertwine. They all work together. They all support one another. They all develop one another. So it's a living framework that helps us stay balanced when life feels uneasy or unsteady. And hard times often reveal our inner extremes. Think about how we react. When you are faced with a hard time, a hard decision, a hard situation, think about how you react. Right? You may find that you rush to like a harsh self-judgment, perfectionism. That's an often situation that I find. So people want to be perfect with everything. And that perfectionism, right? When they find that, oh, here's an error, here's a mistake, in whatever it is, that they start to circle back to that harsh judgment, right? Or despair, right? Oh, I'll never get this. This is always going to be, woe is me, right? Or even the urgency to fix everything immediately, right? That's an extreme as well. Right? It has to be fixed right away. Hurry up. But that's an extreme, and that can lead to more suffering in our lives as well. Right? And so the middle path invites us to turn towards these patterns with curiosity rather than condemnation. Right? Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? We can ask, what is this moment asking of me? And balance begins with listening. Right? Simply listening. And so compassion is really at the heart of the middle path. Right? The middle path becomes dry and intellectual without compassion. Right? And compassion is deeply entwined in the entire Buddhist practice. And with compassion, that eightfold path, right, the middle path, becomes very, very deeply human. Right? So compassion does not mean indulgence, nor does it mean toughness. It means meeting suffering, our own and others' suffering, with care. Right? And during hard times, compassion may sound like this is hard, and I'm allowed to feel it. Right? I don't have to do this perfectly. Right? And others are struggling too. So, how many times have someone told you to suck it up, right? When you've been feeling sad, right? Maybe it's the loss of a dear friend or a loved one or a pet or even a job, right? Your career, maybe your business shut down. And they tell you to suck it up. Right, Gus? Say hi. And so you're allowed to feel your emotions. So that's important. It's also important to remember that to not live there too long. Right? Because when we live in our emotions too long, it takes us away from the middle path. And so we have to soften towards ourselves, but balance what naturally follows. Let's just take a moment, pause at this time, and reflect silently. And so what I would like for you to do is just bring to mind a current difficulty. It could be anything. Notice where you may be pulled towards an extreme, pushing it away or being swallowed by it. Now gently ask, what would the middle path look like here? Not as a concept, but as a felt sense in the body. Perhaps it is slowing down. Perhaps it is simply reaching out. Or perhaps it's simply resting. And simply allow that answer to be simple. Right? We don't have to make things complicated. Too often we get into our own ways, our own habits, of making things more difficult, more complex than they truly need to be. We overthink. Overthinking is not part of that middle path, right? Mindful reflection is. Mindfulness and meditation and overthinking is not one of those right types of actions. What happens is when we overthink, we try to go through all the different iterations and outcomes. And we go down, if you've maybe heard this saying, right? We go down a rabbit hole, right? Which comes from Alice in Wonderland. But we go through all those different scenarios that truthfully never come to fruition. Right? Think about yours whenever you've overthought something. And you think of all these different situations. What am I going to respond to? How am I going to say this and whatnot? And what if this happens? What if that happens? Comes to find out, nothing happens. So you've wasted a lot of energy, a lot of, your peace and your own balance for something that's just never going to happen. And so that's where we find the middle way, right? And so walking the middle path through hard times does not mean, right, we never stumble. It means we learn how to return, right? Resilience, right? Again and again, right? And balance it's not something we achieve once. How about that? Excuse me. So balance isn't something that we achieve one time and we're there, right? It's something we practice moment by moment, right? And the Buddha taught us that just as the ocean has one taste, and that's the taste of salt, so do my teaching has one taste, the taste of freedom, of liberation. And so when we practice the middle path, we understand that there is going to be suffering. We understand there's going to be that disappointment and uncertainty. We don't shy away from it. We don't run away from it. We don't totally avoid it. And we don't necessarily embrace it all the way, right? We just accept that this is a hard time. And understanding that hard time, that is our path. That is part of life, right? For all the good times that we have bad times. For all the bad times that we have middle times, neutral times. And so the middle path allows us to face those challenging times, much more wholesomely, more steadfastly, right? Without being overwhelmed. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. Our next live stream will be on the 16th, right? So February 16th, and it'll be on the Bodhisattva path and dealing with altruism, right? And these hard times, right? And these challenging and these challenging and divided times. How are we able to walk that Bodhisattva path? And so that's important as well as a follow-up to our talk today. And so we will see you on February 16th at 6:30 a.m. in the Central Time Zone. And with that, my friends, I wish you all a wonderful day of peace, ease, and well-being. Namo Buddhaya.